We continue now at the top of Daf Bezim and Bezim Meseches Rosh Hashana. This is Rosh Hashana Daf Tube. On the previous summit, the Brisa had said that let's say a king becomes the king on the 29th of Adar, so when the 1st of Nissan comes already, that's the end of his first year and the beginning of his second year. And so the Gemara says, Kamash Malon, this line in the Brisa comes to teach us the Nissan Rosh Hashanah Limalachim, that Nissan is considered the Rosh Hashanah as far as kings, like we said previously. And the Gemara continues, V'yom echad b'shana chashav shana. Additionally, it teaches us that one day in a year is considered like an entire year. In other words, in this case, the king became the king on the 29th of Adar, only had one day of his first year. That's considered an entire first year. And when Nisan comes, that's the beginning of his second year. And then the Brisa continued, V'imlo amad ela be'echad b'Nisan. Let's say the king only started his reign on the 1st of Nisan. Ein monin lo shana atriyagia Nisan acher. It's only considered a full year when the next Nisan arrives. The Gemara says, Pshita, isn't that obvious? If the 1st of Nisan is Rosh Hashanah L'Malachim, of course that's how you do the calculation. So the Gemara says, Lo, no, tzricha, it's needed, De'imnu aleh me'adar, that they actually decided he was going to be king already in Adar. In other words, the officers made the decision that he was going to be king in Adar, but he was only inaugurated on the 1st of Nisan, and it comes to teach us we go by when he actually becomes king by the 1st of Nisan. Mahu detema, what might you have thought? Nimnu le tartin shinin, this should be considered like 2 years, because they already made the decision to make him king in Adar. So Kamash Malon, so the Brisa comes to tell us that that is not the case. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, Meis ba'Adar, let's say the king dies in Adar, v'omar acher ta'achtav bi'Adar, then another new king takes over in Adar. So monin shana lazeh v'lazeh. In that case, we count the year for both of them. Rashi over here explains, lazeh v'lazeh habolichtov shtar ba'Adar. Let's say somebody wants to write a shtar in Adar, la'achar she'omar hasheni, after the second person became the king, the person who took over. Im ratzah lichtov b'shtar b'shnas ploni lemelech shemeis kosef. If you want to write in the shtar that it was in the year that so-and-so in terms of the king that died, you can write it according to that king. V'im ratzah kosef b'shana rishona lemelech ploni shamar, or you can say that it's year one of the king that took over. In other words, you can choose either one. That's what it means, monin shana lozeh v'lozeh. You can count that Adar, you can count it as a year, either the last year of the previous king, or it can be the first year of the king that was the successor. Meis ben Nisan v'yamen acher tachta ben Nisan. Now the Brisa continues, let's say the king dies in Nisan, and another king takes over in Nisan. So again, the Brisa says, monin shana lozeh v'lozeh. So again, you count it as a year for both of them. Rashi over here says, Meis ben Nisan v'yamen acher tachta ben Nisan v'hu adin amad be'echon mikol hachadashim. This is true in any of the months. It doesn't have to be Adar or Nisan. Sha'ad Nisan haba, meaning any month before Nisan, before the next Nisan. V'rotza limnos bechol ashtara sheyichdevu mishamar hasheni leminyan shnos harishon mona v'rotza kosev b'shan rishon lemelech shama. You can either write it according to the king that died, or you can write it according to the king who took over. And the Brisa continues, Meis ba'Adar, let's say the first king dies in Adar, v'amar acher tachta b'Nisan, and a new king, he begins only in Nisan. So monin rishon el rishon, so then the first year, that counts for the first king, ushni l'sheni, and the second year counts for the second king. Rashi over here says, ushni l'sheni habalichto misha'amad zeh. If you want to write a shtar from when the second king took over, lo yimna shana shniya lemelech shemes. You can't say that's year 2 from the king that died. She'ein shana zu shalo, because that year is already not his year anymore. He was never king in that year. V'lo yimnas harishon l'sheni. You can't count the first year for the second king. Likros shana sha'amad bashniya, that you would say that the time that the second king started is his second year. That's not true. Ela shniya zu rishon l'sheni. Rather, this second year is actually the first year for the second king. Again, it didn't start the previous year because he only became king in Nisan. The Gemara continues, Amar Mar, the master said, quoting the Brisa we just mentioned previously, Meis ba'Adar v'yamen acher tachta b'Adar. Let's say the king dies in Adar and the new king takes over in Adar. Monin shana lazeh v'lazeh. You can count the year for this one and for that one. So the Gemara says, Pshita, isn't that obvious? So the Gemara says, no, Ma'u detema, what might you have said? Shasa levei lo manin. In 1 year, maybe can't count for 2 kings. Kamash Malon comes to teach us that indeed, that 1 year can count for both of them. Rashi over here says, Shasa levei lo manin, and mishenichnas bo hamelech shemeis. In other words, the king that died, if he started this year, in other words, when Nisan came of this year, he was the king. So afilo yom echad, even if he was only king for 1 day of the year, lo yechtevu kol shana zu b'shtar leminyan melech ha'omed. This year, all stars need to be written for that king, for the king that started off the year, not for the new king. Elo lemelech hames. Maybe it all has to go for the king that died. You might have thought that is the case, and that's what the Brisa is teaching us. That is not the case. And the Gemara continues, Meis b'Nisan v'yamar acher tachto b'Nisan. Let's say the king dies in Nisan and the new king takes over in Nisan. Monin shana lazeh v'lazeh. Again, same idea. You count the year for both kings. And so the Gemara says again, Pshit, that's obvious. Of course, if you want, you can count it for the king that died. If you want, you can count it according to the years of the king that took over. So the Gemara says, no, Ma'u Detema, what might you have said? Ki amrinon yom echad b'shana chashav shana b'sof shana. When do we say that one day of a year is considered an entire year? That's at the end of a year. In other words, if a king starts towards the end of the year, so then even if it's just one day of that year, that's going to be a whole year, and then it begins his second year. Avol b'tchila shana, but let's say a king just starts off a year and then he dies, so then lo amrin, and maybe we don't say in such a situation that one day of the year is considered a year, kamash malan, that we do say that. It comes to teach us that no, we do say that one day of a year is always considered a year. Rashi over here says, b'sof shana kagon melech ha'omid ba'adar, kol solo shana kashiyatz adar, like we just said. Let's say a king becomes, let's say a king is a king in Adar, so that year, the whole year finishes when Adar finishes. V'chashav lo yom shebesof shana zu kashana shleima. The day at the end of that year, it's like he did his whole first year. Leo shana haba nikra shana shniya, and then when Nisan comes, that next year, that's considered his second year. Avol yom echad b'tchila shana, but let's say a king is the king for just one day at the beginning of the year. So lo yachshav lo yom echad shana, that one day, let's say he dies, shouldn't be considered a whole year. V'lo yichtavu shtar b'shana zu l'shmo mishameis. You can't say that we're going to write a shtar in his name in this year when he dies. Maybe you would think that that's the case, and that's what the Bryce is teaching us, that you are allowed to count this year to this particular king. The Gemara continues again, quoting the Bryce, Meis ba'adar v'amar acher tachtov b'Nisan. Let's say the king dies in Adar, and the one that takes over only takes over in Nisan. Modin Rishon al Rishon, so that first year belongs to the first king. Ushni l'sheni, and the second year belongs to the second king. And so the Gemara says again, Pshit, that's obvious. Again, the second king only took over after Nisan, so why would you count him from the year before, and also vice versa? So the Gemara says, Lo no tzricha, it's needed. The imnu aleh me'adar. What happened is that they actually appointed him, meaning he didn't actually become king, but they decided and they determined that he was going to become king from Adar. Umelech ben melechu, and additionally, he's the king, the son of a king, so it's kind of obvious that he's going to take over. So Ma'u Detema, so then what might you have said? Nimnu le tartan shnin, we should count this as 2 years, because he basically took over in Adar. Kamash malan, again, it comes to teach us that it doesn't matter if you've determined he's going to be the king, it only matters when he actually becomes king. Rashi over here says, Umelech ben melechu, he's the king, the son of a king. The imisham de imnu alef. The only chiddush is that it was determined that he would be the king. Lo itzrich lashmin, and that already is not a chiddush. We've already said earlier in the Gemara, we learned from a different line that if you're just determining that someone is a king is not enough. The shamina lami reisha, we already learned from the reisha. We learned from the beginning of the brisa that is the case. Aval hashtadik atarti, but now you have 2 reasons to say that, because it was determined he would be the king, and he's the king, the son of a king. So ema nimnu le mikamaisa. So then maybe you'll really say we should count from the first year, from the Adar. Kamash Malon. So that's what it's teaching us. No, it only goes by when he becomes the king. And Rashi says, V'taimo shel davar, the reasoning behind this is, Lefi malchus yerushahi. The malchus is in fact an inheritance. In other words, the fact that he's the king, the son of the king, why should that make a difference? Because it is an inheritance. T'chsiv, like the pasuk says, L'man yarech yom mal mamlachto hu uvanu. The pasuk even says, his days and him and his children. So you see that in general, kingship is considered an inheritance. And the Gemara continues, Amar Reb Yochanan says, Minayin lemelachim she'in monin lohem ela min Nisan. How do you know when it comes to kings that we only count from the month of Nisan? Shenemar, like the pasuk says, Vayihi b'shmonim shana, it was in the 80th year, v'arba meo shana, in 400 years, meaning it was 480 years, let's say it's B'nai Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim, 480 years after B'nai Yisrael left Mitzrayim, b'ashana haravias, in the 4th year, b'chodesh ziv, in the month of Ziv, hu hachodesh hasheni, that refers to the second month, lemelech Shlomo al Yisrael, for when Shlomo became king over Klal Yisrael. This is a pasuk in Sefer Malachim. Now Rashi over here says, b'chodesh ziv hu iyar. Chodesh ziv is iyar, like the pasuk itself says, hachodesh hasheni. Kedem mefaresh kro hu hachodesh hasheni. Ve'amrinu lekamon Nisan Rosh Hashanah l'seder minyan hachadashim. Like we're going to say, when it comes to the into the years, Nisan is considered the Rosh Hashanah. It's considered the first month of the year. So the second month of the year is Iyar. So we're talking over here in the 4th year. We'll see what that means. In the second month, meaning the month of Iyar, when Shlomo HaMelech was king. L'melech Shlomo al Yisrael Ashana Revius Kai. When we say 4th year, we mean to say the 4th year of his kingship. Umikra Mesurasu. The words of this pasuk are a little bit out of order. It should be Bashana Revius Tznius lemelech Shlomo al Yisrael. The way it really to understand it is in the 4th year when Shlomo was the king over Yisrael. B'chodesh Ziv u'achodesh hasheni. In the month of Ziv, which is the 2nd month, hachanami ksiv korachrina lekamon vayachel livnos b'chodesh hasheni b'sheni b'shnas arba lemalchuso. We have a similar pasuk that's written again in Divrei Hayamim. It says again the language of b'shnas arba lemalchuso. So in any case, the pasuk here is talking about a particular time in Shlomo HaMelech's rule, and it mentions when Klal Yisrael left Eretz Mitzrayim. And so the Gemara says, Makish Malchus Shlomo liYetzias Mitzrayim. What's the pasuk doing over here? It seems to be comparing the kingship of Shlomo to Yetzias Mitzrayim. And that's where we learn it out. Ma Yetzias Mitzrayim mi Nissan, just like Yetzias Mitzrayim happened from Nissan, Af Malchus Shlomo mi Nissan, so too the kingship of Shlomo is counted from Nissan. That's how you know that Nissan is the Rosh Hashanah l'Melachim. Rashi over here says, Makish Malchus Shlomo le'inyan minyan Hashanah, meaning in terms of counting the years, liYetzias Mitzrayim, we compare it to Yetzias Mitzrayim. Sharei HaMikra hazeh mono shana zu shnas dalid meyos u'shmonim liYetzias Mitzrayim, because this pasuk itself is counting 480 years from Yetzias Mitzrayim. Uv'shnas arba limloch Shlomo, and in the same breath, the pasuk is saying it's the 4th year of King Shlomo. Ma Yetzias Mitzrayim minyan hashanim shemonim la maschilin mi Nisan, just like Yetzias Mitzrayim, when we count the years from there, we're starting from Nisan. Af Malchus Shlomo mi Nisan, so too when it comes to the kingship of Shlomo, we're starting from Nisan. And so the Gemara says, "V'Yetzias Mitzrayim gufa minon." But 1 second, how do you know Yetzias Mitzrayim itself? We count from Nisan. Even if they left Mitzrayim in Nisan, that doesn't mean that we count the years using the month of Nisan. Minolan de Nisan maninan. How do we know we count from Nisan? Dilma mi Tishrei maninan. Maybe we should count from Tishrei. Rashi over here says, "Ema mi Tishrei." Ava b'sheyatzu b'Nisan. Even though they left Mitzrayim in Nisan, mishigia Tishrei karulo shana shniya. Maybe when Tishrei comes, that's when we call it the 2nd year. Lefisha Tishrei Rosh Hashanah l'shanim hanimnim. L'vriyas olam, because Tishrei is the Rosh Hashanah when you're counting the years from the creation of the world. V'huadin Yetzias Mitzrayim. So maybe we use that month also for Yetzias Mitzrayim. And so the Gemara says, Lo sal kadaitach, do not let that enter your mind that we would count from Tishrei when it comes to Yetzias Mitzrayim. Techsiv, because the pasuk says, Vayal Aaron HaKohen el Hor Hahar. It says that Aaron HaKohen went up to Hor Hahar, to the mountain, Al Pi Hashem, by the word of Hashem. Vayom Hashem, and he died there, B'shnas Ha'arboim, in the 40th year, L'tzeis B'nei Yisrael Me'eretz Mitzrayim, from when B'nai Yisrael left Mitzrayim, B'chodesh HaChamishi, and it was in the 5th month, Be'echad HaChodesh, and it was the 1st of the month, talking about the time that Aaron died. Uchsiv, and the pasuk also says, Vayhi B'arboim Shana, it says it was in the 40th year, Ba'ashtei Asar Chodesh Be'echad HaChodesh, it says it was the 11th, in the 11th month, on the 1st of the month. So Diber Moshe v'Gomer, that's when Moshe spoke to Klal Yisrael. And this pasuk is the beginning of Sefer Devarim. It's when Moshe begins his speech of Sefer Devarim. It's happening in the same year that Aaron died, just a few months later, and they're both being called the 40th year from when they left Mitzrayim. And that's what the Gemara points out. Midakoi ba'av v'kari loshnas arboim, from the fact that in the month of Av, that's when Aaron died, the 5th month, that's called the 40th year from when they left Mitzrayim. V'koi b'shvat, and then we're talking about in the 11th month, which is Shvat, and we're calling that V'kori Loshnar Arboim, and we're calling that as well the 40th year. Mechlal, the Rosh Hashanah, Lav Tishrei, who that clearly implies that Rosh Hashanah is not Tishrei, because again, going from Av until Shvat, you're passing through Tishrei, and yet the year is not changing over. We're still calling it the 40th year, so clearly Rosh Hashanah is not Tishrei when it comes to counting the years from Yetzias Mitzrayim. But the Gemara says, Bishlam Mahech, I understand in the first pasuk you brought, Mefarish Dil Yetzias Mitzrayim, it's clear that we're counting the years from Yetzias Mitzrayim. In other words, in the pasuk you brought with Shlomo HaMelech, so it says it's from the time that they left Mitzrayim. Also in the pasuk by Aaron, when it says he went up to Hor Hahar, it says we're counting the years, L'tzeis B'nei Yisrael Me'eretz Mitzrayim, from the time B'nei Yisrael left Mitzrayim. But in the pasuk you're talking about where Moshe Rabbeinu was speaking to Klal Yisrael in the beginning of Sefer Devarim, it doesn't mention anything about Yetzias Mitzrayim. Elahai mimaydi Yetzias Mitzrayim. But this pasuk over here, where it says again in the 11th month, in the 40th year, Moshe spoke. How do you know we're counting 40 years from Yetzias Mitzrayim? Dilma lahakomas hamishkan. Maybe we're counting the 40 years from the time that the Mishkan was put up. Now the Mishkan was put up in the 2nd year, so there is no real proof. It could very well be that Tishrei is the Rosh Hashanah when we're counting from Yetzias Mitzrayim, and the pasuk in Sefer Devarim is not counting from Yetzias Mitzrayim. And so the Gemara answers, Kedamar Rav Papa. No, the answer to that is like Rav Papa is going to say later on, Shnas Esrim L'Gzeira Shava. Later on, Rav Papa is going to say that you can make a Gzeira Shava. It says Shnas Esrim and it says Shnas Esrim somewhere else. You can do a comparison. So Hachanami, so here also you can do the same kind of a limud. Shnas Arboim L'Gzeira Shava. Again, it says Shnas Arboim when it talks about when Aaron dies, and it says Shnas Arboim or Arboim Shana over here also when it talks about Moshe Rabbeinu's speech. So we make a Gzeira Shava and we assume we're counting from the same point in time. Makan li'yetzias Mitzrayim, afkan li'yetzias Mitzrayim. Just like over here, we're counting from Yetzias Mitzrayim, so to over there, we're counting from Yetzias Mitzrayim. But the Gemara says, but how do you know the episode that happened in Av even happened first? Maybe Aaron died after that speech began. You don't know what happened first. How do you know the incident in Av happened first? Dilma Maisa de Shvat Kadim. Maybe the incident that happened in Shvat actually happened first. Again, meaning that Moshe Rabbeinu began his speech first. Now, if that was the case, it could very well be as follows. Moshe Rabbeinu begins his speech in Shvat, and then just a little bit later is going to come the month of Av. It's all the 40th year, and then really Tishrei is the Rosh Hashanah, right? If the incident in Shvat comes first, then there's no problem saying Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah. On the contrary, it's better to say Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah because Nissan is not going to change the year over. So then again, they're both in the 40th year, and the incident in Shvat happens first. And so the Gemara says, Lo sal kadaydach, don't let that enter your mind. It's impossible to say that the incident in Shvat happened first. Aaron had to have died first. T'chsiv, like the pasuk says, Acharei hakoso es Sichon. It says after we defeated Sichon. That's what it talks about in Sefer Devarim. When Moshe Rabbeinu was giving a speech, he talks about after Sichon was defeated. V'chinoch nafshei di Aaron, and we know that when Aaron died, Akati have a Sichon Kayim. Sichon was actually still alive. So if Moshe Rabbeinu was speaking after the death of Sichon, clearly it is also after the death of Aaron. T'chsiv, like the pasuk says, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Gimel Amud Aleph.